Hello, and welcome to day 2 of the female reproductive system, which is day 3 of human reproduction, but we're just going to call it the female reproductive system day 2. Now, this diagram might look a little unfamiliar because we're used to seeing the female reproductive system sort of in that goat's head shape, right? But this is the same diagram just from a different angle. So let's go ahead and identify these structures. Structure number 1. You can see this is a little tube, and it is the fallopian tube. That is the site of fertilization. That carries the egg during ovulation and then transports the egg either once it's been fertilized or if it hasn't been fertilized for menstruation into the uterus. So that is the fallopian tube. And there's 2 of them, but in this diagram from this side view, we can only see 1. Structure number 2. It looks like a little egg, and that's helpful because that is the ovary, the site where the eggs or ova are produced. And structure number 3, looking like a horseshoe in this diagram, is the uterus. And this is the place where the baby grows and also where the endometrium develops. And we're going to talk a lot more about the uterus in the coming days of female reproduction. But that's the uterus. And then structure number 4, this tube leaving the uterus, is the birth canal or vagina. And let's orient ourselves in the body. What else are we looking at here? Right here, right next to the uterus, is the bladder, which is why if any of your moms or family or friends have ever been pregnant, when they're big pregnant, like after 5 months, they have to urinate all the time because, as you can see, the uterus is right on top of the bladder. So when the baby gets bigger, it's sitting and pressing right on top of the bladder all the time. And then this tube leaving the bladder is the urethra. So that is the tube where urine leaves the body in both males and females. But you can see the female urethra is completely internal. It's all inside the body with one little hole, which is not the vagina, just like the more you know information for hopefully the girls all already know this, but for the boys, the pee and the blood don't come out of the same hole. That is the pee hole. That is the vagina. So again, this is the bladder and the urethra. But those are part of the excretory system, right? But we did label those when we looked at the male reproductive anatomy. So this helps orient us how the male and female reproductive anatomy differ. But today's aim is how do hormones of the female reproductive system allow for reproduction? So we're going to be talking about 2 hormones primarily, but there are also others. Estrogen, which regulates the development of female secondary sex characteristics and the building of the endometrium, and progesterone. And progesterone is the pregnancy hormone. So progesterone maintains the endometrium and eventually turns it into the development of the placenta, which is the sac that will nourish the growing baby. But let's go ahead and do a little reading. Oh, and also, because it's about to come up in this passage, another word for fallopian tube is oviduct. It's the duct where the ova, where the eggs are transported. All right. The female reproductive organs the ovaries, are located within the lower portion of the body cavity. In the ovaries, each cell is present in a tiny sac called a follicle. About once a month, a follicle matures and bursts, and the egg is released from the surface of the ovary in a process called ovulation. So that's the release of an egg. The egg cell then passes into the fallopian tube or oviduct. And again, that's the same thing. They mean the same thing. Fallopian tube is oviduct, same word, different word, same thing, which leads to the uterus. And again, that's the pathway we just saw. If sperm are present, fertilization may occur. And again, the site of that fertilization would be in the oviduct or fallopian tube. If the egg is fertilized, it degenerates. If the egg is not fertilized, it degenerates. And it will be released with menstruation. So along with the menstrual blood, which isn't actually blood, it's the endometrial lining, the unfertilized egg will be released. The lower end of the uterus, the cervix, and that is right there. So like the little door between the uterus and the birth canal or vagina opens into a muscular tube called the vagina or birth canal. When embryonic development is complete, the baby leaves the body through the vagina, and the embryonic development and the fetal development all occurs inside of the uterus. Hormone production. The ovaries produce the female sex hormones, estrogen and progesterone. These hormones regulate the maturation of egg cells, as well as the development of secondary sex characteristics, including the development of the mammary glands and the broadening of the pelvis. So the mammary glands are the breasts, and the mammary glands specifically are the parts of the breast that produce milk to nourish the baby. And that word mammary is also part of the word mammal, right? And most mammals produce milk for their babies. That's part of why we call them mammals in their mammary glands. And a fun fact about humans is humans are the only animals that have breasts all of the time. So most mammals only exhibit like breasts that are visible on their bodies when they're fertile during their periods of fertility. But human females, number one, we're fertile year round, which is kind of cool. Not every day, but once a month we're fertile. And we have breasts all the time. So, you know, human beings were evolved for making babies. Estrogen and progesterone are also involved in the menstrual cycle and pregnancy. Right, so again, those two primary hormones that we're talking about are estrogen, which is the main female hormone, and then progesterone, which is the pregnancy hormone. And again, that PR should help you remember. Can I spell pregnancy? Yes, I can. All right. Where does egg maturation occur? So let's go back to the passage. The follicle matures and bursts. So each egg cell is present in a tiny sac called a follicle, and that is where the egg maturation occurs, in the follicle. Which is inside the ovary. And each month, remember we have a right and left ovary, each month, one of the ovaries, and it doesn't like alternate like 1 month left, 1 month right, 1 month left, 1 month right. It could be 3 months left, 4 months right, or it could be right forever and ever and ever. It varies. And you know, we need more female doctors and scientists to go out there and investigate these things, because a lot of times the female reproductive system has been looked at as a confusing thing by mostly male doctors and scientists, but we are learning more about it now. Thank you, Gains of Women in Science. All right, where does fertilization occur? I've said this one enough times, but we can look back in the passage. It occurs in the fallopian tube or oviduct. And remember that 2 words for the same structure. Where does fetal development occur? Not in mommy's tummy, but in her uterus. And now this diagram can be a little bit confusing, and we have an introduction of 2 other hormones, luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. So hold on. Ooh, okay, I'll write these down here at the bottom. LH is luteinizing hormone. I think it's spelled like that, but I might have added an extra I in there. Luteinizing hormone. And then FSH, what do you think that does? Is called follicle stimulating hormone. What do you think that does? Do you think it stimulates the follicle? And the luteinizing hormone is important in the luteal stage of the female reproductive cycle, which is involved in the development of the corpus luteum. And you can see right before the corpus luteum stage or the luteal stage, we have a peak in the luteinizing hormone. So, okay, let me show you what's happening in this diagram. So this is really 3 different diagrams in one. So, okay, we have here this first layer, which is showing the hormone levels. Then this second level here which is showing the location of the egg. You can see that's the ovary, the maturation of the egg within the follicle, the egg being released. Oh, sorry, you're not seeing where I'm pointing. Forgive me. Okay, so this is the ovary. This is the mature egg. This is the release of the mature egg, and then that hole there is the follicle. You may have heard that word before, follicle, and follicle just means like a little hole where something develops, right? Your hair has follicles. So the little holes where your hair goes out of are follicles, and you can think of the follicle in the in the ovary, in the same way. And you can see here, there is the follicle sort of sealing and healing, and another egg will start to mature over here on this end of the cycle. You can see here on the bottom, this is a 28-day cycle. And at the other end of this 28-day cycle, it will repeat. So this is the menstrual cycle. It's not quite 1 month, but 28 days, that's almost a month. And then down here on the bottom, you can see this is the development of the uterine lining. So it starts at the beginning with a little uterine lining, then there's a little decrease in the amount of uterine lining, and then right around the time of ovulation, right when the egg is released, when the body is hoping for fertilization, right? The body is hoping that sperm will come around and fertilize that egg. We have the nice, thick, spongy endometrium, which is ready for the fertilized egg to be embedded in its wall. And then over here at the end, you can see we have menstruation beginning. So this is when the endometrium will be released through the vagina in the form of menstruation, which is usually described as like menstrual blood. But again, even though I'm coloring it red, it's not really blood, it is endometrium. And that is what is released during menstruation. And then about 14 days before you menstruate, you ovulate. And that is the egg being released. So this is ovulation. So hopefully that made this diagram make a little bit more sense. I know it can look a bit confusing, and now we're going to interpret the diagram. So we can see here, the first question asks, what is the average length of the menstrual cycle? And it's about 3 to 7 days. So the average length, like it says here in the diagram, which is what we're going to be using to answer these questions, is about 4 days. It can be a little bit longer or a little bit shorter. And especially when you're very young, when you've just started menstruating, it's very common that you might not menstruate for a month, or you might have a longer menstrual cycle, a shorter menstrual cycle, as your body is developing and your hormone levels are becoming more consistent. At approximately what day in the cycle does ovulation occur? So let's go ahead and take a look at this diagram. You can see there, I went and marked it. Right there, at day 14, we can see that egg is being released. So approximately day 14, about halfway through the cycle. And we can call this the menstrual cycle or the female reproductive cycle that occurs in periods of 28 days. Number 3, which 4 hormones help regulate the menstrual cycle? And we can see those all here up top. We have FSH, estrogen, LH, and progesterone. So that's follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, estrogen, and progesterone. Number 4, which day is the beginning of menstruation? And again, we're looking here at this diagram, and we can see, although it might be a little hard because, let's highlight our scale there again. We can see approximately day number 28 is when menstruation begins. And again, that's the shedding of the lining. And we can see there the diagram, part of the diagram showing us the uterine lining, it begins to get smaller as it starts to be shed or released. And that's why menstruation doesn't all happen all at once, because it's layers to the lining that are being shed. Number 5, what is happening in the ovaries during the follicle stage? And that's maturation of that egg, baby. Maturation of, let's be more specific, of an egg in preparation for ovulation. And that is the menstrual cycle. So I know some people who had taken living environment before mentioned that these diagrams are really complicated. So I hope that we were able to decode it a little bit in this video. Today's aim was, how do the hormones of the female reproductive system allow for reproduction? We talked about two hormones primarily: estrogen, which is the main female hormone that controls the development of female secondary sex characteristics and ovulation, and also progesterone, which is the pregnancy hormone. We took a look at a diagram of the female reproductive system and read a bit about it. And then we examined the data from the menstrual cycle. Go ahead and complete your exit ticket and have a super fantastic day. See you guys all tomorrow on Zoom. Bye, guys.